Chris stepped off the plane, rolling his stiff shoulders after hours crammed into a tiny seat. His body ached from the trip, but his exhaustion was nothing compared to the eagerness bubbling inside him. He was finally home. After nearly a month of long meetings, red-eye flights, and endless work calls, he was back where he belonged. Thoughts of Jessica carried him forward through the terminal. He had missed her, the way she laughed at her own bad jokes, the scent of her perfume lingering on his clothes after a hug, the way she curled up next to him at night, as if the world outside didn't exist. A familiar warmth spread through his chest. This trip had been tough, but she was the reason he endured it. He picked up his pace, weaving through the throngs of travelers. The plan was simple: grab his bag, call a cab, and surprise her at home. Then he saw her. Jessica. For a split second, relief washed over him. She was here. She had come to pick him up. But that moment of joy shattered almost instantly. She wasn't alone. Chris stopped walking. The world around him faded into a distant blur as his eyes locked onto the scene unfolding just a few feet away. Jessica stood near the boarding gates, wrapped around another man, her arms draped over his shoulders like they belonged there. Their bodies pressed together, familiar, intimate. Chris felt his pulse hammer against his ribs, each beat louder than the noise of the airport. He blinked, hoping, praying, that he was wrong. That maybe, just maybe, his mind was playing tricks on him, exhaustion warping reality. But there was no mistaking what he was seeing. Jessica tilted her face up, eyes glowing with something Chris hadn't seen in her for months. She smiled at the man. A real, radiant smile. One she used to save for Chris. And then, without hesitation, she kissed him. His breath hitched. The floor beneath him felt unsteady, as if the ground itself rejected the weight of this moment. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, nails biting into his palms. He should move, should react, should do something. But all he could do was watch. The man, a tall, well-dressed stranger with an air of casual arrogance, pulled Jessica closer, their bodies fitting together like they had done this 100 times before. Chris felt like he was drowning, his lungs filling with disbelief, with rage, with something deeper, something colder. It all made sense now. The late nights. The unexplained absences. The distant tone in her voice whenever they talked over the phone. For months, Jessica had dismissed his concerns, her words soaked in fake reassurance. She had painted him as paranoid, overworked, insecure. And yet, here she was, proving that every gut instinct he had ignored was right. The weight of it settled over him, suffocating. Chris took a step back. Then another. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, watching the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, melt into another man's arms. Seconds. Minutes. Time had become meaningless. A boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, snapping him back to the present. Jessica and her lover pulled away, laughing softly. She adjusted the strap of her purse, smoothing down her hair, completely oblivious to the storm she had just set off in the heart of the man she was supposed to love. Chris forced himself to breathe, forcing air into his lungs as he took in the final piece of the puzzle. The flight number on the screen above them. Jessica wasn't just meeting this man at the airport. She was leaving with him. His grip tightened around the handle of his suitcase. He could march over there. He could say her name, watch her expression crumble as she realized she had been caught. But the anger, the betrayal, settled into something else. Something sharper. Confrontation wouldn't be enough. Jessica had spent months lying to him, deceiving him, making him doubt his own instincts while she carried out an affair right under his nose. She thought she had everything under control. Chris exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steadying. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Chris stood rooted to the spot, watching as Jessica and her lover strolled toward the gate, completely unaware of his presence. His pulse pounded in his ears, the weight of realization pressing down on him like an iron vice. It wasn't just this moment, it was everything leading up to it. He should have known. Every doubt, every unanswered question, every late-night argument that ended with Jessica turning the blame on him, it all clicked into place. She had spent months rewriting reality, twisting his concerns until he doubted himself. The unexplained overtime at work. The sudden insistence on changing her phone password. The way she would turn her screen away whenever he entered the room. The vague excuses about missing charges on their bank statements, little drips of deception, carefully crafted to make him feel like he was the problem. Jessica had been meticulous, always just convincing enough to make him second-guess himself. He could still picture her standing in their kitchen, arms crossed, her voice laced with frustration as she brushed off his concerns. She had made him feel like a fool, like an overworked husband who was seeing things that weren't there. But now he saw it all clearly. Chris gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain still. Confronting her now would be too easy. She would deny it, spin another web of lies, maybe even turn on the waterworks for sympathy. No. She didn't deserve that kind of reaction. She had already taken so much from him, his trust, his peace of mind, his faith in their marriage. The least he could do was take something back. Chris took a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the handle of his suitcase. Jessica thought she was in control. She thought she had covered her tracks. But she had made one critical mistake. The flight. She had booked it using the credit card in his name. It had seemed harmless enough at the time, just another transaction lost in the mix of their shared finances. After all, she had always handled their travel plans, citing her organizational skills as the reason he should let her manage the details. Now, that decision was about to cost her. Chris turned away from the boarding gate, his mind already calculating his next move. He wasn't just going to expose her, he was going to dismantle the illusion she had so carefully built, piece by piece. Let her think she was leaving with that man. Let her believe she had gotten away with everything. Because when that plane took off, it wouldn't be Jessica relaxing into her first-class seat. It would be her, escorted off in handcuffs, the weight of her own deception crashing down on her like an avalanche. Chris walked away from the boarding gate, his steps measured, his breath even. Every muscle in his body ached for confrontation, for the satisfaction of watching Jessica scramble for an excuse. But he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a fight. This wasn't about anger, it was about control. Jessica had spent months manipulating him, feeding him lies with a straight face, rewriting reality until he doubted his own instincts. She had spent all that time covering her tracks, but she had made a crucial miscalculation. The flight she was about to board had been booked under his name, using his credit card. A fraudulent charge, technically. And she was about to learn just how badly she had underestimated him. Chris made his way to the security desk, his mind razor-sharp despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The uniformed officer behind the counter barely looked up at first, but once Chris calmly slid his phone forward, displaying the unauthorized transaction, he had their full attention. The process was swift. A report was filed. Notes were taken. A quick verification with the airline confirmed the reservation under Jessica's name, but with a card registered solely to him. That was all they needed. Chris wasn't done yet. While the officers handled their side of things, he stepped away and pulled out his phone. One call to the bank was all it took to flag the charge. His tone remained composed, almost casual, as he explained the situation. His card had been used without authorization, and the transaction needed to be investigated immediately. He didn't need to embellish or exaggerate. Facts were enough. The response was immediate. The bank froze the card. The transaction was reversed. Jessica's perfect little getaway had just become a criminal offense. By the time he hung up, the airport security team was already moving. Chris lingered near the gate, keeping his distance but close enough to see it unfold. Passengers were still boarding, dragging their luggage down the narrow jet bridge, oblivious to the storm brewing in first class. Then, movement. Two uniformed officers appeared at the entrance of the plane, their expressions unreadable as they spoke with the flight attendants. A quiet discussion. A nod. Then they disappeared inside. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, the moment Chris had been waiting for. Jessica emerged, confusion giving way to panic as she was ushered off the plane. Her lover followed, looking around in disbelief as whispers rippled through the waiting passengers. Chris didn't move. From where he stood, he could see the exact moment it hit her. The way her face went pale, the shift in her expression from indignation to realization. She knew. Her eyes darted frantically around the terminal, scanning the faces of strangers, searching for someone, him. Chris remained perfectly still. She wouldn't see him. Not yet. The officers spoke to her in low, firm voices. Jessica shook her head, her hands raised in protest, but there was no escaping this. Her lies had finally caught up with her. Chris let the corner of his mouth curl into the faintest hint of a smile. She had played the game well, but the game was over. And she had lost. Chris remained still, standing just beyond the chaos as it unraveled before him. Jessica, always poised, always in control, was now caught in a whirlwind of consequences she never saw coming. She fought against it at first, trying to brush it off as a misunderstanding, her voice rising as she attempted to explain herself. The officers, however, remained unmoved. Every frantic gesture, every desperate plea fell flat. The other passengers, still filing onto the plane, slowed as they took in the scene. Curious glances turned into full-on gawking. Some whispered, nudging their seatmates, piecing together what was happening. Others stood frozen, gripping their carry-ons as if unwilling to step away from such an unexpected spectacle. And then there were those who did more than just watch. A flicker of movement near the boarding gate caught Chris's eye, a young woman with her phone raised, discreetly recording, her lips curled in amusement as she captured every second of Jessica's unraveling. Someone else had their phone out too, angling for a better shot. Jessica had never been one to shy away from attention, but this wasn't the kind she wanted. Chris could see it in the stiffening of her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands. This was different. She wasn't just caught, she was being seen. And not just by him. By everyone. Her lover stood to the side, brow furrowed, frustration written all over his face. He asked questions, his hands moving animatedly as he demanded to know what was going on. Jessica barely acknowledged him. She was too busy trying to salvage herself, spinning explanation after explanation, throwing out justifications faster than she could think them up. The officers weren't interested in excuses. The first cuff clicked into place, metal snapping tight around her wrist. Jessica recoiled, pure disbelief flashing across her face. One final attempt to resist, to reason, to charm her way out of this. Nothing worked. The second cuff followed. A hush fell over the terminal as reality settled in. Passengers no longer whispered. They stared. The murmurs, the recording phones, the widening eyes, it was all happening around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She turned, her body stiff, her face draining of color. And that was when she saw him. Chris watched as recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by something deeper, something worse. Realization. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. This was him. For a split second, her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but no words came. Chris simply smiled. No satisfaction. No malice. Just a quiet, knowing smile. Jessica had lied. She had manipulated. She had torn apart everything they had built together. And now, the world was watching her fall. Chris turned away, his steps slow and deliberate as he left the chaos behind him. The sounds of Jessica's protests, the rising murmur of onlookers, the occasional click of a camera capturing her disgrace, all of it faded into the background. He didn't need to stay. His work here was done. Jessica had spent months spinning her web of lies, twisting reality to suit her needs, making him question his own instincts while she played house with another man. But she had been reckless, arrogant. She had thought she was untouchable. Now, she was learning just how wrong she had been. Chris stepped onto the escalator, the terminal growing smaller behind him. The air felt different now, lighter. The tension that had wrapped around his chest for months had finally loosened, unraveling like the careful deceptions Jessica had woven around their marriage. By the time she sorted through the legal mess she had walked into, his life would be miles ahead of hers. The divorce papers had already been prepared. He had contacted a lawyer weeks ago when the late nights and the distant conversations had started feeling too familiar. He had hesitated then, convincing himself that maybe he was being paranoid, that maybe she was just tired, that the cracks he saw in their marriage were just stress, not signs of something worse. That hesitation was gone now. She would be served the moment she was released, and by then, everything that tied them together would already be severed. The house. The locks would be changed by nightfall. The bank accounts. She would wake up to find them empty, every dollar she thought she could leech off him pulled back into an account in his name only. The car. The one he had paid for but let her drive. Sold. Everything she had built with her lies was crumbling around her, and this time, there was no one to blame but herself. And her new man. He wouldn't stick around. Chris had seen it in the way the guy had stood there, looking more annoyed than concerned as Jessica pleaded with the officers. He had already started distancing himself, probably regretting ever getting involved. The moment he realized Jessica wasn't the alluring, carefree woman she had pretended to be but a manipulative liar with a laundry list of problems, he would run. She would be left with nothing. And Chris? Chris had everything to gain. A future without Jessica's lies. A life that didn't involve constant suspicion and exhaustion. Stepping through the airport doors, he let the cool air hit his face, inhaling deeply. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt free.